Well, everybody, I am super excited as always to be having a conversation like we're going to have today because looking back at last year and analyzing trends and data is so important. And so many times, I don't know about y'all, but I tend to wing it. I tend to go with my gut feelings. But you know what? Sometimes feelings lie. And we want to try to get away from that if we can, just to make wiser, smarter choices. So today I'm super excited to have Amelia Ihlo with Rooted Farmers and Adrianne Gammie with Marilla Field and Flora here today. And we're going to talk about trends and data and stuff that, sometimes isn't fun. But you know what? The more I've talked with Amelia about some of this information, the more excited I am about it. So I hope you are too. Welcome, ladies, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
Having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
So everybody, I want to encourage you. Amelia's been on our podcast a couple times. You want to check out her page on our website, theflowerpodcast.com, because there's some great episodes on her page, and you'll find this one there too. But we're also excited to have Adrianne here because she's new. And so we're going to have a new page for her as well, where you can also listen to this episode. Adrianne, I just would love to get a little background on you. And how did you get started? Because, I mean, you sort of do it all. I'm just amazed at what you do.
A little bit of everything. Um, I think so many people in this industry have such interesting stories of how they get to where they are. And I think, I'm just another one of those stories. But I grew up a farm kid. I grew up on a farm, but like not a cows and corn farm. I grew up on an apple farm. So, peaches and apples.
Okay.
Um, and for some reason, my parents are amazing. And they're like, farm daughter, you should definitely go and study fashion design. That seems like a really great thing for you to go do. So I did. And I worked in fashion for 10 years. When I graduated from college, I designed children's clothes for Target, um, and worked in fashion for 10 years. And kind of what specifically led me to the flower world was I got laid off from my fashion job when I was 6 months pregnant, living in Canada.
Oh, wow.
My husband and I lived in Canada for 6 years, and it effectively ended my career. And I was kind of left not sure where to go. And I was like, well, I've always really loved flowers, and, maybe I could design flowers because I have this design background too. And so I started working part-time with an event designer, and then came to work with another designer who sourced a lot more local product and worked with a lot of local Ontario growers. And through that, through working with that design studio, I met up with a lot of Ontario growers and was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. I had no idea this is a thing. This is the perfect combination of my farm girl heritage and my design training is I can grow and design flowers. Um, and that kind of, yeah, landed me with Marilla Field and Flora several, years and iterations later. Here we are.
So that is amazing. And I'm curious. So, like, how big is your production? I don't know how to ask that question sometimes. Like, how big of is your production? What do you mainly grow? And then who do you mainly sell to?
Yeah, I always think that's a great question. It just gives such good context to people understand kind of where I'm coming from. So my farm is about 10 acres, but I farm about 2 acres of that in pretty high density production. And we have, a little bit of everything. Um, I've moved around a lot of farms. So I've been farming for about, this will be my ninth season farming, and this is my third farm. So I have moved a lot.
Wow.
This is my forever farm. And I have peonies now, and we've planted hydrangeas, and I've got all these really incredible perennials that I'm finally starting to be able to get established. So we have a lot of that. And then I also have high tunnel production and annual production, so we do zinnias and celosia and lots of dahlias. So we do a little bit of everything, but we're pretty small. We're not very mechanized. I have a lot of really wonderful neighbors around the farm, and if I need a tractor, I will call one of them
I love
to help
that.
us out with the heavy lifting. But for the most part, it's me and my crew working a small farm where we sell mostly direct to florists. But we also do weddings and events ourselves. We do a few things on the farm for events, and have a subscription program,
Wow.
and a little bit of everything. I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket, so we spread it across a few.
Yeah, that's great. Gives you a lot of opportunity too to maximize your production and your profit and everything else. And so,
Yeah.
obviously, we have Amelia here, so I guess it's safe to assume you use rooted farmers.
Adrian does. And I don't know if you remember this, Adrian, but actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about this. We first crossed paths in 2020 in the early days of COVID, I think. And my husband was my part-time marketing team, and he was helping me call folks and try to get some feedback. And you very graciously answered your phone and talked with him for like 15 or 20 minutes. And it was just a really great conversation. And he got off the phone and he was like, I just talked with this woman named Adrianne in Michigan. She's really fantastic. Anyway, so that's when we first crossed paths. But yes, she's been selling unrooted
Yeah,
for a bit.
we wouldn't be able to do what we do without using rooted. I could sing your praises, to the heavens.
Well, what I really love is that we're able to kind of come together under this umbrella today to kind of talk about what happened last year, what trends were there. People are already well, a lot of people have already made decisions. They've already bought seed, they've already bought or planting seeds, they're already buying bulbs or tubers or whatever. And, but they're continuing to evolve and tweak what they do as things start to warm up, even though as I say that I have snow on the ground, which is crazy. But anyway, with that being said, I know that there's always so much great information that Rooted does pull together, and it's a tremendous resource. Can you tell us a little bit, Amelia, about that and kind of what you I don't know where to begin, but I know that there's a treasure trove of information here.
Yeah, so we are able to pretty uniquely draw out trends and insights from sales all over the place on Rooted, because we actually have a pretty unique way of listing products on our platform. So in order to list a product, instead of kind of naming it yourself, you're actually choosing from our database of products. So what that allows for is we can then aggregate data around all of those different products. So, if Adrian is selling a particular zinnia and it's also being sold by, 400 other growers in other parts of the country, we are able to synthesize the data around all of that. And then we can do that times infinity for every product that's listed, and really look at it and kind of slice and dice it in a lot of different ways. And so that's something that we do at the end of every year, so that we're kind of capturing the entire season. And then we're looking at kind of what did well, what were our sort of highest selling, like top selling products or colors. And then we're also looking at changes from the previous year. So what may have gone way up or what may have gone down quite a bit. And that's in terms of flowers and kind of a genus that might outperform or underperform the previous year, but also in terms of colors. And so that's a really fun way for us to kind of take a look back at the previous year and also ask questions about what that might mean going forward. And then provide that out to growers. I think it's something that is a really important piece of the puzzle as we're all thinking. So if you go back and listen to those other podcasts, you'll hear I'm also a flower farmer myself, and
That's right.
run a collective here in New Hampshire and Vermont, selling down into Massachusetts. And so I get to bring some of those perspectives also to it. And, we're kind of always asking, so what? And the so what is, how do we make this useful to growers and to our hubs, and contextualize that out for them so that they can then do something with the information. And so I think this is going to be a really fun conversation to sort of pair our data from what happened broadly, and then hear Adrian's perspective about how that sort of how that kind of aligns with what she's seeing in her market.
Well, one of the things I know when we chatted a couple of weeks ago was, I asked the question, who are most of the flowers being sold through Rooted going to? Because that is an important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, you really have to know your audience. And I think that's the case whether you're looking at Rooted data or your own data, is really understanding who is the audience that is sort of providing that feedback or those numbers. So we do about 70% of our sales are going out to wholesale buyers, and wholesale buyers can be brick and mortar florists and, kind of more of your traditional retail florists. They are grocery stores and they're event designers. And so that's really what wholesale looks like at Rooted. And then the other 30-ish% is really the retail customer segment. And those can be, folks who are, walking into some of our collectives or hubs and who have market floors, or and just sort of impulse buying, or they can be DIY brides, or folks who are doing DIY flowers for events. But that's kind of the audience that we're looking at, which is great question, right? Like that gives you the context to understand kind of when these flowers are doing really well or not doing as well. This is the audience that we're looking at, and it might look different if you were looking at a different audience.
Sure. Well, Adrianne, one of the things I think is so important about this understanding of where the flowers are going is, if you're selling mostly to brick and mortar shops or to wedding and event florists or things like that, that maybe they're more influenced by trends, like the trends we're going to talk about. Has that been your experience? I mean, especially because you have this incredible asset of having some fashion background and having all these different things. Like, you probably have a really great perspective on what these kinds of trends really mean.
Yeah, there's different trends are going to make sense in different contexts as well. And my market here in southeastern Michigan is, also going to be very different than, somebody on either one of the coasts. And even getting more nitty gritty into that, your brick and mortar florists have very different needs and trend priorities than do wedding and event florists. So, in figuring out what you're growing, you need to also figure out who wants that product and who does that product make sense for? Because they are segmented as well according to that, and the sales do reflect that, and the data will reflect that as well. But that data shouldn't come as a surprise. You should have been like, oh, that particular zinnia, I didn't think that, orange zinnias, not a lot of wedding florists are going to be using orange zinnias, but, brick and mortar florists need every color of the rainbow every day of the week. And that could be great for them, for the person who's like, I hate purple and I want an all orange bouquet. There's something for everyone in that, but yeah, so trends will make sense to more segments more than they will for others.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that came up when we were chatting about this too, Adrianne, was we were talking about kind of the colors that we saw doing really well in 2024, and then where we saw changes. And one of the colors that was not on the list of like top sellers was yellow or gold. And Adrianne's comment was, oh my gosh, I always put a huge chunk of my field into yellow because they have the University of Michigan right there.
There will always be an appetite for that, really hyper local to our area right here, because there's just a constant perennial demand for that.
Yeah, we're that way
so
with
sometimes,
orange.
that again is a trend that I might be seeing that someone else, might not, because that's unique to us here.
But I think that's so important because that allows you to really kind of take sort of the bigger picture lessons, look at your own sales, and then also understand what are the really unique needs of your customers that may not get captured in kind of the broader data sets.
So let me, just to be clear, if you are presenting information, Amelia, as a whole from all these data sets, then if you're a rooted farmer grower and you utilize the platform to, sell your flowers, you can get your own individual data too. So like you can see what colors did, like, yellow might scream loudly for Adrianne when she looks back at last year's sales, I'm assuming.
Yes, yes. It's and that's what's so great about that, about having that data is we can, take a look at what Amelia has from a larger level, but then you can compare that to what it does for your own personal data coming out of Rooted, and to see, where, if there's maybe a larger trend above all of those, that is something to really pay attention to then.
And
Sure.
that's just automatic for all sellers is you have all of these analytics baked in. So as soon as you're processing your orders and you collect your payment for them, those orders go right into your analytics. And then you've got, all of your sales by flower, all of your sales by color. Once you look at the colors, you can kind of drill down and say, yeah, but which blushes did really well for me and really down to the cultivar. So you have a lot of flexibility to kind of just really granularly look at your data, and it's automatic. You have to do nothing else to get it other than just kind of navigate to that page.
That's
I will
nice.
say one thing that I have learned is, and this is true if you're selling unrooted, which I absolutely love, or if whatever tool you're using to track your own data, the data you get out of it is only as good as the information you put in. So
Mm.
I'm finding when I'm looking at some of my own personal data, I'm like, oh gosh, why is that so weird? Why can't I find this other piece of information that I'm looking for? It's because I didn't enter the information from the onset the way that I wanted to, report the data and the back end. So that's a really important consideration too, that you might have something that skews unpredictably, but it might be because you categorized something in a different way.
It's a good point. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's just start to unpack some of this because I can't wait. I'm like on the edge of my seat here. So when you look back at 2024, I know there's probably some surprises that we can talk about, but were there any, like, I know you recently released a blog post which we can link to as well
Yep.
about with some of this data, but like the top selling flowers. I mean, are they the flowers we usually expect, or is there any surprises in there?
Yeah, so the top selling flowers were kind of your usual suspects, right? Like this is sort of like what brings designers in the door or florists in the door or kind of anybody coming in looking for local product. And we're seeing lots of dahlias, we're seeing zinnias and ranunculus and cosmos. Lysianthus really picked up quite a bit this past year. Celosia, snaps, scabiosa, tulips, gomphrena. So I think it's like, when we kind of look down that list, there aren't shockers in what those top sellers were. But I also think it's really important to kind of look at the other side of that, which is, those that grouping of those kind of top 10 or 20 flowers did not represent like the vast majority of sales. We had a whole lot of products that sold this past year that weren't in that kind of list of 10 or 15 usual suspects of annuals. So I think that was also really exciting.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because as you were saying that, I think to myself, what about, I- peonies? Peonies are always such a popular flower, but the window of sales on it is such a small percentage of the
Yeah.
year. The
Yep.
dollars are really great and very attractive, but time wise, it's such a small narrow window. Where zinnias or dahlias, they go on for weeks, like in weeks and weeks, and that's why we have frost mists. When we look
Yep.
forward to finally we can take a break because the frost killed everything. But and so I'm wondering, yeah, how does that play into some of this information?
Yeah, I mean, so peonies were on the top 20 list, so they were number 12. So they were up there, but also, I think it's really important to sort of look for the holes in the data. So what is the story that it's telling? And if it's not looking like it's the complete story, how do we get more of that, kind of more of those gaps filled in? So I think one of the really easy places to see this is when we look at the top selling colors on Rooted. Green was like number 2. That's foliage, right? So that's
Oh,
foliage
okay.
that is selling through the platform, and folks are selling a whole lot of it. But there's only one foliage item that falls in that list of top 20 selling products, and that's eucalyptus. And also not a huge shock, but that means that there are a whole lot of foliages that are selling. And actually green was one of the higher growing colors too for this past year. So there were a lot more, Adrian and I were kind of talking about, what's causing that? What is driving some of these changes? And I think it's fun to sort of, think through what could be the drivers of those changes. So why would we be seeing, a big increase in sales of foliages? And it could be increased comfort from buyers who are willing to kind of branch out and look outside of that sort of staple list of annuals. It could be that more growers are kind of recognizing the need to plant foliages. They're maturing, they're kind of learning how to market what performs well. But that I think is fun also to look at, is sort of where those changes are.
Interesting. I'm curious, Adrian, if in when you look back at 2024 and with regard to either rooted information and what you see in your, do you see any differences in your data really, comparing the two sets?
Well, one thing specific to me, and there may be some other growers that experience this as well. My farm is at a point where I'm reaching maturity on some of my perennials that we hadn't been able to cut in the past. So in some of my top items, my peonies did make it into my top items because you know what? This was the first year we were able to cut them.
Love
So,
it.
certain time, things like that are just all of a sudden coming in and are starting to shift my own data and what I'm looking at. And I can kind of see the larger matrix across the farm, across perennials and our annuals, and through the entire season. Tulips are also one of my top selling items, and I've forgotten about them by the time dahlia season is rolling around because they were long gone, like back in April. So, it's really, I think it's really good to look at this data because it can give you that larger context within your own farm, because you live so by the week that it's good to be
Yeah.
able to kind of see a larger picture of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm curious then, with that being said, when it comes to colors, so what are you seeing? Like, what are the most popular colors? You said
Yeah,
green was
so
number two. I'm guessing
yep.
white is.
White was number one. Yep, you got it. Do you want to
Yeah.
guess? We can play a game. White was
Uh,
number one.
no pressure. Let me see
Green.
the whole white, green, and blush thing or pink
Yeah,
thing.
pink.
Yeah,
Pink
yeah,
actually. Blush was a little bit farther down, but white, green, pink. And we separate the red tones more than others, but yeah, those were definitely the top three. We did see purple in there, like purples, lavenders, and actually apricot. And we were talking about this a little bit because if you look, and we ended up looking back a couple of years. If you look at last year, apricot was sort of that Pantone color of the year.
right.
And we saw a lot of growth in apricot last year. And the year before, it was like a burgundy color. And we also saw growth the year before in burgundy. But I think the sort of overarching trends when we kind of sort of split the colors tonally and looked at them, we saw a lot of the colors that kind of really nicely complement apricot growing this past year. And also those sort of softer tones replaced a lot of the really rich, moody tones. So like we saw diminished sales in things like reds and burgundies. And Adrienne, I think you also saw that this past year for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a much harder time moving burgundy dahlias this year versus a couple years ago. I couldn't grow enough burgundy dahlias. So there's definitely, things are cyclical like that. And things are cyclical, but there's still, white will always be a perennially favorite color in the world of flowers. And I think when that Pantone color hit, it was such a great color in flowers. And I think it resonated with a lot of people and really, had a big influence on people's choices in colors that year.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this year will go. It's mocha mousse, I think, this year. So I'm not sure that's gonna.
I love some Roseanne Brown Lysianthus, but it can be a polarizing flower.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
We'll see.
great,
Time will tell.
yeah. Well, that's a great example of a flower that's so fabulous, but is at its peak at the wrong time of year. And so, everybody wants that more in the fall, not in the spring. But I mean, it's a great color either way. It has benefits, but yeah, the demand for it is not there. It's interesting because from my perspective, being on the wholesale level, I don't have all this great data. I just, from my data is literally from week to week. And as people give us future orders and we look at that, and I will say that burgundy last year for us was not as strong of a color as it was prior years. But even in prior years, what drove us crazy was we were having burgundy requests from March until, October. And people were like, why do we want burgundy in, May and April? And why? I just don't get that. But fortunately, that seems to have passed. Now, what I'm curious about, though, is if those three colors are your top three colors and you saw trends sort of in an upward momentum on apricot and peaches, or I think corals was one of the colors I noticed. Yep. Yeah. So if you look at those numbers compared to the year before, so 23, obviously those numbers have gone up because that's the trend. Sometimes I feel, and this is the way I feel about apricot, sometimes I feel these upward trends are just going to hang there. Like once they're there, I don't feel like that's going to go away.
Yeah. I mean, we never want to be predictive because we don't know what's going to happen. Right. I think, it's when we're looking at this is a really important piece of the puzzle. And this is what we would call sort of your historical sales data, right? Like we're looking at the historical data. And it's important. It's really important to know what did well for you, what didn't do so well for you, what did well broadly, what didn't do quite as well broadly. But it's not like you don't ever want to look at a single silo of information and try to make decisions based on that one thing. I think understanding where you've come from and sort of the historical data is a really great piece of it. And that's what we're doing here. I think for forward looking, there are a lot of different ways you can kind of approach your qualitative and quantitative market research. And you can, do quantitative surveys. SurveyMonkey is, very, very approachable for us as growers. And we can kind of put together a brief survey for our buyers and try to get them to engage in that way. And also qualitative. I think one of the coolest things that Adrianne has talked about doing is she's, even at this point, she is not letting go of deliveries. She does all of her own deliveries specifically so she can have those qualitative conversations with her buyers.
I love that.
Yeah, such an important part because data is so important. It tells us where we've been, but to learn about where we're going, I want to know what my event florists what requests they're getting from brides that they're booking for next year. That's going to help me figure out what I need to do. So just like you said, Amelia, I just sent out a survey to my florist. I'm actually going to be putting up another high tunnel this year. And so I went out to my florist and like, hey guys, I'm planting a new high tunnel. What should I put in it? What do you want more of? What are you getting more requests of? What can we do for you locally that you would like to get from us? And that is so important, to have that line open with them and to give them that opportunity to give me that feedback. So I do it, off season now in a survey like that, but I do a lot of it happens, in a very qualitative setting when I'm delivering. And what are they working on this week, and what's something that they're excited about or that they really struggled to get a hold of this week and they're just so disappointed that it didn't turn out, and how can we help solve some of those problems for them. And I glean so much of that when I'm on delivery, that is a really important piece of my business that I haven't delegated, because I hold those relationships very dear, and I want to make sure that they're functioning as we need them to, and that we have the opportunity to communicate as much as possible. And that is a really great time when I do that. To make sure that
that you're not missing anything.
Right, that we're not missing anything, and we're providing what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's another input into sort of how do we think about this going forward, is having those conversations, which I think as growers, we can sometimes feel intimidated by, or like we maybe are, sort of showing up at the wrong time. But I think most buyers want to be able to have an open dialogue with you. Most buyers really do want to have and it is often, and we know this from kind of our application process. So to join Rooted, there's an application process. For buyers, it's free. So we're just controlling, are you somebody who actually is a wholesale buyer and not just someone who's looking for wholesale prices? But in that buyer application, we're asking why local? Why is local product important to you? And one of the most common answers is, I want a relationship with my growers. I want to have that sort of relationship and communication with my suppliers. And so it's really not an imposition that I think we as growers often think it could feel like to them. So that's another input, and your yields are really an important input. I think that's something we talked about a bit is, just because something performs really well broadly in the market doesn't mean it actually grows for you. And it may perform really poorly for you on your farm. And that's something that you're tracking, Adrianne.
Yeah. And that's another one of those things that, so I track my yields, and I also track my sales. And it's important to recognize that those numbers are not always the same. You might have something that you're growing that is crazy productive, and you can cut loads and loads of it, but you're not finding a home for it. So when you can see the difference between your yield and your sales, that's where you can capture that kind of stuff. But a lot of it also happens. We're culling one cultivar of zinnia this year, because I remember standing out in the field with my farm manager, and I'm like, we just aren't cutting any of this. Like, nobody is ordering it. And sometimes I hadn't seen data. It was just, kind of an observation that we had midway through the season to be like, why we're giving this particular plant so much real estate and it's not giving us enough back. So that's a great place, to look at what isn't selling. What is it that your customers are not asking for, and swap those things out. Keep those top performers performing at the top for you, and have some fun playing around with the things that are at the bottom. And you have a pretty low risk that you're replacing something that wasn't performing really well anyway, and hopefully you capture something that performs better.
Now, I'm curious. My brain is about to explode, y'all. So I got to say a couple of things. First of all, Adrianne, the thing I love about you making deliveries and having those real conversations is, first of all, you really have to put yourself out there in order to have those kinds of conversations. So my hat's off to you for that. But the other benefit that we didn't mention, but is because I've been doing this for a minute, I know just physically walking in the door and seeing things that you don't have that opportunity if you aren't walking through the door. For example, you might see flowers that they're using like you never even thought about. You didn't even know to ask that question. Or you're like, gosh, I could be growing that, and I didn't know you used it. I mean, there's all kinds of things you learn just walking through the door.
Yeah.
And then you can have a dialogue, then you can ask questions. And of course, what you're talking about is even deeper and more profound for your business specifically, but there's all kinds of sideline things I think you learn also that are valuable. The other thing I'm kind of curious about, and this might be a question for you, Amelia. One of the things that often concerns me as a wholesale buyer is that a lot of times my growers grow amazing flowers, but the wrong time of year. And so, like, I don't want a chocolate sunflower in June. I want it in September or August. There's certain things, and sometimes they don't know that because they don't ask those questions. Yeah. Or they assume something. But is there any data to show that as well? Because, if you're growing something but you're not selling it, then is there really data for that? Or is that got to be on the grower side of things?
So for right now, it's on the grower side of things. And I think a lot of that we kind of have a sense for. I mean, Adrienne was just describing, kind of standing in her field and realizing, gosh, we're not actually selling any of this particular
Right.
bed. And it's again, I think one of those things that can feel a little intimidating is the fact that you aren't selling it matters. But even more than that is sort of the why. So maybe it is what you're describing, Scott, that people do want those chocolate sunflowers. You just have them at the wrong time. And that's not something that you're going to get from, the rooted system. You need to have that conversation with your buyers. We're not a replacement for the relationship building, and we never want to be. That's not what we aim to do. That's not our purpose. We're there so that we can kind of free up your time so that you can do these more value add things like having those really important conversations with your buyers. So I would just say if something is not selling for you and you have those moments where you're realizing it, don't be afraid to ask your buyers. Don't be afraid to go in there and say, hey, I have all these chocolate sunflowers, but I'm noticing you're not buying them. Can you give me any more context? Can you share sort of why it is that this isn't landing with you right now? And occasionally they need to be told that they're not going to offend you. So you need to let them know, like, it's not going to bother me. I'm not going to take it personally. I really genuinely want to know why this is not a fit for you. And when you ask them those questions and you make them feel comfortable providing feedback, they actually are really happy to have those discussions with you. And so it's the why, I guess, is even more important, I think, than just sort of the yes or no, is it selling?
Mm. Yeah, I agree.
Buyers really want to support growers like this because we can deliver some really incredible, beautiful product. And the
Yeah.
more beautiful the product, the more beautiful their work is. And the more beautiful work there is, the more customers come to them and the more we all get to keep doing this. So it's such a symbiotic relationship to for us to all do this together. But you do have to, it does take a little bit of bravery to be like, can you tell me what I did wrong here? But it really helps again to like just have those communication channels open and available and comfortable so that people can give you that. And it's a positive for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Another example I thought of while we were having this conversation was Queen Lime Zinnias, like the redder one. I guess it's called red. It's really
Queen
kind of
lime
a
red.
yeah, it's kind of a dark mauve kind of whatever color. Anyway, I have one grower that one year grew a lot of that in his initial mix, and it was okay. We didn't get a lot of requests for it. But then come 3 or 4 months later, he had kind of phased it out because it wasn't that popular. But then come fall, I mean, we were getting requests for 20 and 30 bunches, and it was like, and so again, I'm saying sharing that because this data is really important, but also the context of it's important, and having those conversations are important, which I know everyone has said that, so I'm just kind of beating a dead horse, but I just, trying to, create the context because it does matter. And I think it's really awesome. Now, one of the things I thought was really interesting was that you noticed more distinction within cultivars, I think, with the data. Is that
We
true?
did. Yeah, we did. So we have thousands and thousands of flowers in our system. And so even at the baseline we were at, which was also, it was already enormous, we saw a 37% increase in the number of unique
Wow.
cultivars sold in 2024 compared with 2023. And that's huge. That's really huge. And I think it's really neat to start kind of asking the questions of why and where were we seeing some of those increases and are they sort of an indication that breeding programs are taking off for certain types of flowers? So like celosia was one of those, zinnias. But where else are we seeing some of those increases? And we kind of look at it also in terms of the higher growing products, like what actually grew quite a bit in 2024 compared with 2023. And I was sitting and kind of just like poring over the data and had kind of an aha moment when I looked at it that almost all of, basically all but five of our top 20 growing, like highest growth products were perennials, which I just thought was really neat. They are, we're seeing a whole lot of like blackberry and raspberry. We're seeing a lot of echinacea. Silene was a big grower. That was awesome. Marigolds, obviously, and pansies, which I think you like, Scott. We saw a lot of allium and foxglove and like grasses, like all kinds of really cool perennial flowers. We're growing quite a bit in 2024 compared with 2023, which again just feels like a really fun development for us to be seeing. Because as growers, I think selfishly, we like to be growing perennials as opposed to sort of pouring all of that time and labor into managing an annual production operation. I think that's something that is a goal for us. Certainly for our farm, we have moved almost everything over to perennial production at this point. Yeah.
Interesting.
And on our farm, we just had a lot of our perennials start to come into full production this year. So that data really hits home for my farm, because we also saw that as well. And it makes a lot of sense. I think it also speaks to, the fact of buyers being more comfortable trying something unusual,
Yeah.
buying some
Yeah.
silene that is, that is not like your entry level flower. That
Yeah.
is like people looking for something really unusual and really special. And I think that's where local growers can really shine. And I know that's what a lot of my florists look to me to. Pretty much all the florists that I work with don't work exclusively with local product. They're buying in imported stuff, and they're, maybe they're buying, 10 bunches of white dahlias, but then they're also going to need, where we can help them, shine even more brightly is with, you put some agrostemma on top of that. Some of those little things that are
Yeah,
really
agrostemma
unique.
was on that list.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't ship well. It is a magical flower if I've ever seen one. And it doesn't ship well. If somebody wants to use agrostemma, they have got to find a local farmer who grows it and get it from them. So I think that's where, there is a very unique quality about what these kinds of growers can do and offer something that's unique. And I think people are really starting to latch on to some of that unique product. That's some of my favorite things. I love doing things like agrostemma. I love basket flower and sultan because they are weird in the most wonderful way. And it really helps to differentiate one's work. It doesn't look, when you put something like that in your design, it doesn't look cookie cutter. It's really interesting.
Right.
And I think florists are there for it. If you can give it to them, they are like, give me more. So that's, encouragement for like all the wonderful little weirdo flowers out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to repeat this at the end of the episode, but I want to take a second here because I know Amelia's mentioned already now that for buyers, Rooted Farmers is free, but for sellers, it does cost something. But because Rooted Farmers is a sponsor of the Flower Podcast, there is a code that will give you $75 off. It's TFP25. That stands for the Flower Podcast. TFP25 for the year 2025. So it's good for this year. And it doesn't matter which level you pick, you can apply that discount. So I want to make sure I let people know that right now. I feel like the villain now. I'm going to be the villain because I know we've talked about color trends that are up and new things that are up. Is there anything that's down? Anything that, I know we talked about burgundy and I'm kind of okay letting burgundy go, but I'm just curious. I'm kind of curious if there was any other trends down that maybe before somebody, invests all their money in something, which we know there's no crystal ball, because if there was a crystal ball, we'd all be playing the lottery right now, not doing cut flowers. But with the data, whatever it shows, I'm kind of curious. Anything there?
I mean, really we did see sort of a either flat or diminished sales in those really rich, moody tones. But I think something you were saying earlier, Scott, kind of like triggered me to say, gosh, I wonder if we had looked at a different date subset, would we have different insights? And so
Mm.
if we kind of looked at, what performed really well, and you can do this easily as growers on Rooted, is you can set your date ranges to see what colors were selling really well for me between, like March 1st and June 1st. And so you can kind of toggle throughout the year. I did not prep those numbers for this podcast, so I can't easily do that because ours is just a much more in-depth process. But I think that would be a really neat thing to look at is kind of, maybe overall we saw that Burgundy did not do as well. But if we were to really look and drill down on sort of like, September 1st to, the end of November, would we see something different? So, I think that's sort of context for we did see a lot of those really rich tones displaced a bit this past year, but also it doesn't mean that there's no place for it in your crop plan.
Right.
I think it's really just recognizing that there may be trends. Some of them are probably outside of our control, and we aren't going to figure it out until a year from now when we're sitting here talking again about what did we see happen in 2025. But, I think recognizing that there's also a time and a place for all of these different things.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I'm looking at, say, yes, a decrease in going back to that burgundy dahlia, it doesn't mean I'm going to pull all my burgundy dahlias. It means I'm looking at the proportion to my total. That, is probably going to come down, but it's going to get replaced by maybe something that's coral. So it's never shifts in trend are rarely. Are we completely abandoning something? Shifts are a little bit more subtle than that. And yes, sometimes they're seasonal. Red, who wants red in May? Nobody wants red in May. But, in
Nope.
September, red feels pretty great. So, it's finding where that fits into your overall matrix, where it makes the most sense and what the right proportion of that is. It doesn't mean you have to completely walk away from something, but just kind of re-examine the role that it plays in the overall.
Yeah, because all those colors are popular. I mean, all those colors have a place. But I will say, because you mentioned it, I'm going to reiterate it, that last year, well, 2 years ago, I will say it's 23, I was getting requests for coral like crazy. And I'm like, all this, I mean, yeah, we were still getting a lot of burgundy, but that was the color, that was the, I don't know the horsing metaphor, but it was the it just came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, I'm every other request. Even my growers are like, "What is this? Why do you need 40 bunches of coral?" And I'm like, "Okay." So the nice thing about coral is, for those of you who might be wondering, is there's a lot of leeway for coral. There's all the way, like what is coral? It's kind of like what's salmon. It's that ambiguous sort of, all the way from shrimpy pinky color to, I don't know, tangy apricot color. I don't know what to call it, but anyway, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that, I'm excited to see that trend. I know that all of my growers grew more coral for me, and we had enough, but I got a feeling that's a trend that's not going away. So I'm kind of curious to see what 2025 brings, but yeah. So I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in for free.
Yeah,
But
I'm looking, so I'm
yeah.
looking quickly to see if there were any flowers that sort of dropped off this past year, and strawflower and sunflowers both kind of went a little bit downhill. But again, I think the context there is just to think about it in proportion to the rest of your sales. Just like Adrianne said, it doesn't mean you completely eradicate these from your fields. It just means that you're kind of looking again to see, have a conversation with your buyers and see, maybe why they didn't buy those, and if there's something else that they're looking for in their place.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, that's two great examples. Again, maybe if your business shifts to more wedding and events,
Yeah.
then probably not sunflowers and strawflower.
Yep.
If you're more brick and mortar or grocery store, farmers markets, well, then yeah, maybe those two flowers are going to knock it out of the park for you. So who you're selling to and how you're using it. And I can definitely see that. That's interesting though. Because also straw flower is such a popular flower for those who are drying flowers.
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
I know this Valentine's, I heard of more florists, or excuse me, more farmers that were selling dried bouquets as a Valentine's bouquet, and they were gorgeous. I was like, it's so beautiful, and I'm like, another great way to extend the season. So,
Yeah.
um, well, great. Well, is there anything else trend wise that that I haven't thought to ask about, or that we need to know going into 2025, looking back at 2024? Because that's all we can do is look back at the data.
I think it's always important to, leave when you're planning a crop. And, we have to, like you mentioned earlier in the episode, Scott, all those tubers and all those corms for the 2025 season were ordered and put in the ground long ago. So that ship has sailed. So it's important to think about, how long your lead time is. And we really need probably, at least 12 months, preferably more, to impact changes. And I think it's always important to look at, what are your bottom sellers? What are yeah, those low performers that you can, try and insert something new into that. And see if you can get some traction and capture something new maybe that's happening out there in the market.
Yeah. Well, and I think about this because I just did this myself. I had some dahlia tubers that I had, and I thought, these are going to be great colors for this year. So I started propagating them for taking cuttings, because I want to beef up my numbers, and cuttings are a great way to do that. It's something you can do this time of year. Maybe you can't get more tubers, but you can grow more babies. And so, those are things to think about too. If that's something you've got space, bandwidth for in the middle of February and March, like
If we're adding to the list of things that we should be doing as growers, I think if you are unrooted, you don't need to add it. It's there for you, all of your data and analytics. If you're not unrooted, I think I'd really encourage you to start kind of looking through not just sort of going from memory, because I am wrong every single time I check my analytics and I'm going from memory and I'm like, there was a year where, several years ago where we still were doing a lot of annuals, and I super hated this one particular type of zinnia. And I was like, I'm never growing this again. It's not worth it. I can't stand it. I hate harvesting it. And then it turned out to be one of my top selling products. And it surprised me. And it was just that I was tweaking my memory a little bit with my own bias about the flower. But I think it's so important to have real concrete data and not just kind of going from memory or, kind of your gut, because we often are wrong in how we're kind of, either we're just busy and we aren't kind of factoring in all of those data inputs, or we're just not kind of remembering all of the
yeah,
details of what's going really well with our buyers. That's something I think is just really crucial as an input for you, for your business, to really be thinking about, how do I think about my crop planning? How do I think about my sales strategy? And how do I have conversations with my buyers where I'm seeing these things not going quite as I expected them to?
that's a great point. Because I mean, especially as I have grown older and not wiser, but your memory does get skewed. I mean, you just, it's hard to remember back to last March and April what was going on when you just got done with a very, very busy season. Adrianne, I'm just curious, is there anything that you're surprised about when you look back at your data for last year? Anything like you had, like you were ready to throw on the compost pile that you're like, well, wait a minute, maybe not.
I think there's always surprises in there. Yeah, like Amelia said, we were very colored by our own biases of our own relationship with that flower. I think I was surprised, yeah, maybe by how much yellow I did sell. Um, yeah, I think you can kind of see some trends kind of trickle through in that. I think yellow specifically to me, yes, I have a unique market for it here, but I was seeing more of my event florists doing more yellow based weddings. So I think it kind of trickled into a little thing, into more of my buyers' carts than just one specific. What else was a surprise in there?
I
You know,
can,
I
while
think I
you're
was,
looking, I'm happy to share our farms too if you want to drill into yours a little bit.
yeah, I think, I mean, our biggest selling crop was definitely dahlias, but when and a part of that is not even just trend, it's also a factor of like the amount of bed space I dedicate to things. And like
Oh
dahlias get a
yeah.
lot of real estate. So they should take a lot of real estate in my analytics too. Um, but right after dahlias was tulips, and I don't dedicate a ton of real estate to tulips. So that's kind of surprising, and we grow like the really, all the fancy tulips, the unusual ones, and that's, kind of the niche that we fall into. So there's a lot of appetite for it. And in the spring here in Michigan, after a long winter, there is so much appetite for local flowers, like people just can't get enough. So that's, something, that's part of the seasonality, I think, impacting that as well. And I think I was not as impressed with my peony crop as I had hoped for after having waited 3 years to finally cut them. But they actually performed pretty well relative in my overall matrix of things. So that's good. I'm a little heartened to see that.
Well, I think too with peonies, every year you add to their age, you're just going to get more and more stems, so that you're probably gonna you're gonna
Yeah,
definitely
let's hope so.
see a crescendo there. Amelia, did you have any crops that you were surprised about besides your
we
zinnia?
We ended up adding a whole lot of grasses this past year because we started selling tons and tons of grasses, and a lot of nine bark, which bucks again, it bucks that burgundy trend. Is we actually did a lot of nine bark sales this past year. Those had come in really nicely for us. It was our second year cutting from them, but they did really well, and I was surprised at how many people really wanted them. Um, that was a consistent seller for our farm.
So you mentioned that about the burgundy nine bark. Now there's so many colors of nine bark now. How many varieties do you grow?
We only grow two. We have sort of the large leaf and then the smaller leaf, and both are burgundy. So for
Okay.
us, I look at that burgundy and I chuckle a little bit because we sold so much, and it's the burgundy nine bark. It's the wine colored,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a deep, deep burgundy.
That's
Um,
funny you mentioned that, Amelia, because nine bark was in my top 15 items
yeah,
on my farm too.
yep.
And we have a dark color, and we also have one that is a little more mottled. It's called Autumn Jubilee, and it has these really
Mm,
wonderful
I
kind
love
of
it.
orangey undertones to it. And I would
Mhm.
say generally whenever we plant something, the harder it is to describe the color, the better. If it's peachy, beigey, pinky, that's it. That's
Yeah.
definitely the color you should plant. Or it's burgundy, greenish, orangey.
With a
Yeah,
twist.
definitely plant that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. No, I mean, it's really true though, because a lot of times, I mean, we need as designers, products that help bridge colors. And when there is a melting pot of colors in the foliage or flower, it helps with all of that. So that's great. Now, for both of you, I want to just niche down here or niche down a little bit. So on nine bark, are you guys growing it for flowers at all or just foliage? Or what about fruit, like the berries and the
Nope.
Just for foliage.
just
I
for
I
foliage?
probably don't really start cutting it until at least August.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
flowers don't hold real well.
No.
They look nice on the plant, but they don't hold as well in a vase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know I have received some of the fruited branches, which was a kind of a cool texture to have those pods on there. But obviously, if you're cutting more for foliage, you're not going to have too much of that. But anyway, I just think it's interesting. That's really cool. Well, I don't know. I just feel like there's so many opportunities to tweak, and I know this when this episode releases, it's a little later than we'd like in the year, but I feel like it's still not too late to make some additions, especially in your annuals. And Amelia, we're gonna have to have a conversation later on sometime, I guess, about grasses because I keep getting requests for grasses. I don't, Adrian, do you get any requests for grasses, or do you
Yeah.
grow any of them?
Yeah, I probably have, oh, maybe 4 or 5 different kinds of perennial grasses that we grow. I'm adding a couple new ones this year that we'll
Yeah.
see how they catch on.
Well, I know that I'm continually surprised at the demand for them, and the funkier and more colorful, the better. Especially with the textures and their little plumes and seed pods and all that stuff. So it's just interesting. Well, this has been so helpful for me, I think, and I hope for our listeners just to understand the trends in which way we're going. And if they're Rooted Farmer members, then they have access to all this information. I'd also encourage you to visit the Rooted Farmers blog. I know she has that the team there has put together a wonderful blog post with some of this information, and you might find that helpful as well. But being a flower guy, I just never really obsessed about the data. But I will say, the more I hear these numbers and trends and things, the more I'm like, yeah, I see it. I'm ready to drink the Kool-Aid and look more at it, because I mean, who doesn't want to capitalize on a trend, and who doesn't want to make the most and call out the things that aren't doing well to make more room for the things that are doing well. I think that's what everything is all about. Well, always get to wrap up our episode with this advice question. This episode is no different. I'm excited. We have two guests, so it's a BOGO opportunity for advice. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So, it's so important to have good data, because you can make good decisions and confident decisions based on that. And to, take into account what your buyers are telling. Listen to your buyers. They will tell you what you should grow, and do all of those things. But also leave a little space for yourself. Grow something that is just for you, and you don't have to sell it. You don't have to do anything with it other than enjoy it yourself, because this is such hard work. And, it's the flowers that get most of us into it to begin with. So make sure, grow something that is just because you love growing flowers, and not because it's, a part of your business.
I can appreciate that and love that you said that. We got to feed our own soul sometimes,
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
absolutely. That's important.
I feel like I should have gone first, because now I have to follow that, and I don't want to follow that. Mine is so much less fun.
I love
What
it.
I was going to say was, I hope that this just sort of this conversation kind of helps growers and also buyers, just on the design side. I hope it just sort of helps to open up a dialogue, because I think, the data are really important, and also they're just one piece of the puzzle. And so I think it's really, really crucial that, if we're doing this to try to, earn our own living and
Yeah.
really, try to run our businesses on both sides of that, it's so important for us to be having those discussions with the people who are our customers, and really driving whether or not we are going to be around in future years. So that's my hope slash advice, is that this is maybe inspiration for you to kick off your season this year, tracking your data, and also trying to contextualize them with these conversations with your buyers. But I really feel like I should have gone first, so I didn't have to follow your like very existential advice there.
It's all good. It's all good. Amelia, I'm going to ask one last question of you,
Sure.
because um, I feel like sometimes uh, when we have these conversations, that I know for me, I'm like, okay, so how can people learn more about becoming a Rooted member? Just that, because I feel like this is information that is life changing, and I know, because we've been having these conversations for a few years, that there's so much investment you guys do on the back end to
Mhm.
keep improving this product, to
Yeah.
get more data, to get more information, to give us all, a better footing for moving forward to the next year. So what does that look like with people connecting with Rooted right now?
Yeah, so we have a really awesome team, and we have a lot of growers, and they are working with us at Rooted, and so they're wearing lots of different hats when you kind of reach out to us. So we've got our website, which is a really great place to start, just rootedfarmers.com. And if you are a grower, if you are a hub manager, if you are a wholesale buyer, retail, you can kind of choose your own adventure. And it'll help you to sort of navigate through that process. We are free for buyers, and so we never want to introduce friction there. We want you to be able to come on and start connecting with growers near you. We do ask that you fill out an application because we're trying to confirm that you actually are a business and should have business pricing, so that wholesale pricing. And then on the grower side, we also have an application process, and that's to really make sure that we're setting you up for success. So we're committing to our buyers that we are kind of screening all of the farms to make sure that we have folks who are experienced at growing, experienced at selling wholesale, and are prepared to step into that marketplace, because we are a marketplace. And that means that when you step in, you're not kind of building your own little website, though you do have a profile, certainly. You are stepping into a network of buyers and sellers who are already there. So, I think that's an important thing for us to just share here, is that there is an application process for growers to make sure that we're kind of setting you up for success, and that is all detailed on our website also.
Well, that's great. So I just to be clear, which you were very clear. I don't mean that. I'm when people come and start this process, it's not an instantaneous automatic process. It takes a little, a few days, a week to kind of go through the process of being, approved or questions. So that way everyone knows this is a process that's important for validating your business, for buyers, and being getting everybody on the same page. And but I think I'm glad you do that. I'm glad that it is something that is important, that you're making sure that there are legitimate growers that are offering products, and I think that's important. And I just can't thank you both so much for being on the Flower Podcast. Thank you, Amelia, as always, and Adrianne. We're gonna have to have you on again later at some other time, so we can go we can go deeper into what you do, because I'm just fascinated with that part of the country you're in and all the opportunities that are going on up there. So thank you both for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really fun.